Rain came down against the tall windows of Windmere Hall like a thing that wanted in, and upstairs, in the dowager's parlor where 3 branches of candles burned against the dark, Lady Sabine Calvert lifted the Windmere pearls from their velvet bed and held them to the light. They ran cool through her fingers, rope upon rope of them, ending in the great antique clasp of silver where a leaping heart had been chased into the metal 100 years before any of them were born. She turned to the tall glass above the mantel and laid the strand against her throat, and she smiled at what she saw there, because tomorrow night the whole county would be gathered under this roof, and tomorrow night the Duke of Windmere would clasp these very pearls upon the woman he meant to make his bride, and Lady Sabine had spent 3 careful years making certain that woman would be her. She tilted her chin this way and that, and the pearls lay very white against her skin. Very white and very cold. If there had been anyone in the room with an honest eye and a steady heart, they might have thought it a strange thing, how those pearls caught no warmth from the candles at all, how they gave back only a flat and glassy brightness, whereas true pearl ought to have glowed with something living, something soft as the inside of a shell. But there was no such person in that room. There was only Lady Sabine, admiring the picture she made, and the rain and the crested clasp that had already once sent an innocent girl out into the world with the name of thief hung about her neck. Below stairs, at the servants' door where the yard ran black with water, that same girl stood knocking. She was 3 years older than the last time she had crossed this threshold, and 3 years poorer, and she stood now in a plain traveling gown that had been sponged and pressed until it was respectable, and would never again be more than that. Rain had loosened a few strands of her honey-brown hair against her cheek. Her eyes, a clear and steady hazel, were fixed on the door with neither hope nor fear in them, only a great patience, the unlearnable stillness of a person who has been wronged in the worst way there is, and has decided, morning after morning, not to let it turn her bitter. At her throat, on a thin ribbon worn soft with handling, hung a single small pearl, only one, and where the great rope upstairs lay, white and dead against Lady Sabine's skin, this one small pearl, even in the wet dark of the yard, seemed to hold a faint warmth, as though it remembered a summer it had once been given in. The bolt drew back. The door opened on the stooped shape of an old man with a lantern, and when the light fell across her face, his own crumpled with something close to weeping. "Miss Delia?" said Mr. Fairclough the butler, in a voice gone thin with age and feeling. "You came. God be thanked you came." "You wrote that I must," said Cordelia Ashby, and she stepped in out of the rain, and she took the old man's trembling hand in both of hers as gently as if he were the one who had been standing out in the cold. "You have never once written me a foolish thing in your life, Mr. Fairclough. So I came." He drew her quickly in past the scullery, past the great cold kitchen where a single banked fire glowed, and up the narrow servants' stair that she had once climbed a dozen times a day, and every step of it she knew, and every step of it knew her. Here on this landing she had used to sit with the housemaids and mend by rushlight. Here at this turning she had first been kissed, though that was a memory she did not let herself linger on. Not yet, not with the whole house above her, humming toward the ball that would seal another woman into the place that had once, for one bright and vanished season, been meant for her. Now, before we go a single step further into that great dark house and all it is hiding tonight, let me ask one small thing of you, because I think already you feel the shape of what was done to this girl, and I think already some part of you wants to see it made right. If you do, if there is any part of you that hopes to watch her name washed clean before the very people who blackened it, then stay with me all the way to the end of this, for it is a story that pays back every ounce of what it asks you to carry. And if you would, take one moment now to follow along, so the ending finds you here beside her when it comes. That is all. The rain has not let up, and neither will I. And there is a great deal still to tell. For the truth of it was this, and Fairclough carried it every day of his long service like a stone in his chest. 3 years before, on a night not so different from this one, the Windermere pearls had vanished from the dowager's own dressing room, and before the household had scarcely drawn breath over the loss, they had been found again, or one of them had. A single pearl, loose and gleaming, turned up at the bottom of Miss Cordelia Ashby's workbox, tucked beneath her spools, and her half-hemmed linen where any child might have found it. And with it, worse than it, a folded paper. A confession, they said. Written in her hand, they said, owning to the theft, begging pardon, promising to make what restitution a penniless companion could ever make. Delia had never written a word of it. She had stared at the thing when it was held before her and hadn't known her own name upon it. So strange and cramped and false was the hand that had shaped it. But the paper said what it said, and the pearl was where the pearl was, and that was enough. She had been a parson's daughter, orphaned young, with nothing in the world but a good name and a quick, warm heart. And she had been taken into Windermere Hall as companion to the Dowager Duchess Honoria Hart, out of what everyone agreed was very great charity. A companion has no dowry and no family to stand behind her, and no coin but her character. And when her character is called into question, there is nothing beneath her at all, only the long fall. The dowager had looked at the pearl, and looked at the paper, and looked, last of all and most coldly, at the girl she had fed at her own table for 2 years, and she had said in a voice like the closing of a heavy door that Miss Ashby would be gone from the house by morning, and that her name was never again to be spoken beneath its roof. And so it was done. No magistrate, no trial, no chance to speak. Only a proud old woman's word, and a girl put out into the dark with a small bundle and a ruined name. What made it past all bearing, what Fairclough could not forgive, though it was no doing of his, was that there had been one person in the world who would never have believed it, and that person had been at sea. His name was Nathaniel Hart, and in those days he had been a serving captain in His Majesty's Navy, grandson and heir to the old Duke, a grave and weathered young man with sea-gray eyes and a way of going quiet before he said the things that mattered most. He had loved Delia, not loudly, not in the reckless way of poems, but steadily, the way he did everything, and she had loved him back with her whole unguarded heart, and no one had thought it a fit match, a duke's heir and a parson's orphan. No one but the two of them, who thought it the only fit thing in the world. On the last evening before his ship sailed, he had taken her hand in the portrait gallery beneath the painted eyes of all his ancestors, and had given her a single pearl on a ribbon, one true Windermere pearl, openly, as a private pledge between them. And he had said, "Wait for me." And she had said, "Always." And she had meant it more than she had ever meant anything. He had been 3 months at sea and 1,000 miles from any word when the theft was cried through the house. He never received a single true account of it. And when at last his ship came home, and he climbed the steps of Windermere Hall, a grown and hardened man. It was to be told, gently, and then less gently, that the girl he had left his heart with had proved a common thief, had robbed his own grandmother of the family's greatest treasure, had confessed it in her own hand, and had fled into disgrace rather than face him. He had not wept, they said. He had only gone very still in the way he had, and gone up alone to the gallery where he had once given her the pearl, and stayed there a long time in the dark. From that day he mourned her the way a man mourns the dead, except that the dead are at least owed no anger. And Delia, he believed, had earned his. So he carried both together, the grief and the wrong of it, and neither ever eased. And he never once suspected that the woman he mourned had been mourning him just as hard, in a rented room across the county, wondering why the one letter she had prayed for through all her exile had never, ever come. She had not become bitter. That was the thing Fairclough marveled at, leading her up the dim stair now, her hand light on his sleeve. 3 years of genteel poverty, of taking in fine sewing for women who did not know her story and would have shut the door if they had, of counting pennies and mending her one good gown by a window that faced north, because a north light was kinder to failing eyes, and she had come through all of it with her kindness whole, unspent, as though hardship had only shown her more plainly how much a small mercy could mean to a person who had none. She had learned what it was to be looked past in a shop, to be spoken of behind a fan, to be judged by strangers on a whisper and never once asked. And knowing it, she had sworn she would never do the same to another living soul. On her last morning in this house, cast out and shamed, she had still stopped in the passage to press her own good gloves into the hands of Peggy Combe, the housemaid, who had stood weeping and helpless by the door, and had told her, "Hush now, Peggy, you did nothing, don't you cry for me." And Peggy had never forgotten it. And old Fairclough, who had slipped her what little coin he could, and had believed in her innocence with the whole of his honest heart from that day to this, had never forgotten it either, and had waited and watched, and kept a certain thing hidden and safe against the day he might dare to summon her home. That day had come. The letter he had sent her had said only a little, for a butler must be careful, and the post is not to be trusted, but it had said enough to bring her through the rain. "Come," it had said. "Come before the ball. There is proof at last, and I dare not keep it, and there is no one in the world I can put it into but your own 2 hands." At the top of the stair he stopped, and drew breath and looked at her by the lantern's small light. This girl he had watched grow from a shy parson's daughter into a woman who could stand 3 years of the world's cruelty without letting it bend her. Above them, faint through the floor, came the sounds of the great house making ready footmen's feet, the ring of silver being counted, and somewhere the low, pleased murmur of Lady Sabine's voice, giving orders as though she were mistress here already. "They're all above," Fairclough said quietly. "She has them running like a general, that one. Tomorrow night the whole county comes, and the magistrate with them, and she means to have those pearls about her neck and the Duke's name upon her hand before the week is out." His old hand tightened on the banister. "But the pearls she means to wear, Miss Delia, are not the pearls. I have learned that much and more, and I think, God forgive me for the years I only watched, that you are the one meant to set it right." Delia's hand rose, without her quite willing it, to the single small warm pearl at her throat, the one true thing she had carried unbroken through it all. "Then show me," she said softly. "Show me what you have kept. I have waited 3 years to be believed. I can wait a few minutes more to be proven." Morning came gray and unhurried over Windermere Hall, and with it came the small army of hands that a great house summons before a great occasion. Footmen carried in crates of hothouse lilies. A confectioner from the county town argued softly with the cook over the height of a sugared tower. Girls with reddened knuckles polished the long oak of the gallery until it gave back the pale light like still water. In the midst of all this ordered thunder, Delia moved quietly, a plainly gowned figure with a small pearl at her throat, carrying folded linen as though she had never been anything grander than the woman who carried it. Fairclough had found her a place among the extra staff hired for the ball, a shadow no one would think to question, and for a night and a morning it had held. She had learned, in 3 years of genteel poverty, how to be unremarkable. It was the surest armor she owned. But armor is only proof against those who do not already know your face. And there was one in that house who did. Lady Sabine Calvert came down the great stair at 11, gloved and unhurried, mistress of the household in all but name, and confident that the name itself was only a ball and a question away. She had spent 3 years learning the walk of a duchess, and she wore it now as she wore the rope of pearls at her throat, with the ease of a woman who believed the thing was already hers. She was handsome in a hard, bright way, all clean lines and cool color, and she surveyed the bustle of the gallery the way a general surveys ground he means to win upon. It was there, among the lilies and the ladders, that her eye fell upon a companion's plain gray gown, an honest sweep of honey-brown hair, and a face she had worked 3 years to forget. Sabine did not cry out. That was not her way. She went very still, the way a cat goes still. And then she smiled, and the smile was the worst thing. "Well," she said low, drawing near under the pretense of inspecting the flowers, "the parish cat has come home to the cream. I confess I did not think you had the nerve." Delia did not startle, and she did not lower her eyes. She had promised herself, in a cold room above a chandler's shop, that whatever came, she would meet it standing. "Lady Sabine," she said, and her voice was even courteous, entirely without heat. "Lady Sabine," the other echoed, mocking the steadiness. "How very well brought up you remain, for a thief." The word was placed lightly, like a coin laid on a counter, and Sabine watched to see it wound. "Do the others know, I wonder? The girls scrubbing the boards beside you? The cook who gave you bread this morning? They think you a poor woman come for a day's wage. They do not know they polished the floor beside the creature who stole the Windermere pearls and fled in the night when she was found out." "I stole nothing," Delia said. "You know that better than anyone alive." For a heartbeat, something flickered behind Sabine's bright eyes. Not fear, but the wary calculation of a gambler who feels the table shift beneath a winning hand. Then it was gone, folded away beneath the smile. "What I know," she said softly, "is that there is a confession in your own hand locked in the dowager's cabinet, and a pearl that was drawn out of your workbox before 3 witnesses, and a magistrate coming to this house tonight who would be very interested to learn that the little thief has crept back to the scene of her crime. One word from me, Miss Ashby, and you are taken up before the ball is danced. So you will keep to your linen and your shadows, and when the dancing starts, You will be gone from this house, or I will see you in a cell by morning. Do we understand one another?" Delia looked at her a long moment. She thought of a great many things she might have said. She said none of them. "I understand you very well," she answered, and turned back to her folding, and let the woman have the field. Sabine went on down the gallery, satisfied, the pearls swinging cold and white against her throat, and she did not see how Delia's gaze followed that rope, nor how it lingered, nor what it read there. For Delia had worn the true Windermere pearls once, on the single evening Nathaniel Hart had clasped a betrothal token at her neck and told her, grave and low, that he would carry the Strand's likeness in his mind across every sea between them. She knew those pearls the way one knows a beloved face. And the rope at Sabine's throat was not that face. It was too even, too bright, too perfectly and coldly white. The living warmth of a true pearl, that faint, irregular glow like candlelight held under water, was simply not in it. What hung at Lady Sabine's throat was glass and paste, dressed in an antique silver clasp. And only a woman who had known the real thing could ever have told the difference. She did not know yet the whole shape of it, but she was beginning to. The truth, had the gallery been able to speak it, was uglier than Delia guessed. 3 years before, Lady Sabine had come to Windermere, a poor relation with a taste for the card table and debts that had followed her from 3 counties. She had sold the true Windermere pearls to Josiah Sowerby, the town jeweler, for a fraction of their worth and a promise of his silence. And Sowerby had furnished her the paste copy that now sat at her neck. But a Strand cannot simply vanish from a dowager's cabinet without a hue and cry, and a hue and cry wants a thief. So Sabine had chosen one. She had gone by night to the work-box of the parson's orphan whom the young naval heir had so foolishly, so publicly favored, and she had laid a single loose pearl among the threads and thimbles, and she had sat by one candle and written, in a patient forger's copy of Delia's own hand, a confession full of shame and flight. 2 birds with the one cast stone, the debt covered, and the girl who stood between her and the coronet, swept from the board. And there had been a 3rd stroke, quieter and crueler than either. Nathaniel had written 1 letter from sea, 1 letter to the woman he loved before the news of the theft could reach him, and that letter had come into Sabine's keeping and gone into her fire. So Delia, cast out, believed her betrothed had read the charge against her and turned his face away without a word. And Nathaniel, returning at last to mourn, believed the woman he loved had robbed his house and fled rather than face him. Each had been taught to think the other had let go first. It was the neatest cruelty of all, for it needed no repeating. It simply sat in 2 hearts and did its slow work year on year. Delia did not have the letter, but she was gathering quietly the things she did have. It was Fairclough who gave her the first of them. The old butler found her in the linen room at the turn of the afternoon, when the house had swallowed itself in preparation, and no one marked an old servant's errand. He shut the door with the care of a man closing a jewel case, and from inside his coat he drew a folded square of paper gone soft at the creases with handling. "I have kept this 3 years, Miss Delia," he said, and his hands were not quite steady. "I did not know its worth when I took it, only that it was Sowerby's, and that Sowerby is a rogue. It fell from his book the day he came to value the plate, and I picked it up, meaning to return it. And then the trouble came, and I found I could not give a rogue back anything that might one day speak for you. He pressed it into her palm. It is a pawn ticket. Read the hand. Read the date. Delia unfolded it by the window. It was a receipt in Sowerby's cramped commercial script for 1 rope of pearls, silver clasp, crest of a leaping heart, received, held, and monies advanced against it. And the date at the head of it was set down plain. A full week before the morning the theft had been discovered and cried through the house. A week before anyone had said the word stolen, the true pearls had already been lying in Josiah Sowerby's strongbox, sold. There was no version of the tale in which an honest woman's guilt could have put them there. The theft had been arranged before it was announced. The trap had been dug before the fox was ever near the wall. This is proof it was planned, Delia said very quietly, and she felt the floor of 3 years steady beneath her feet for the first time. This is the whole of it, Fairclough. If the pearls were sold before they were missed, then whoever cried thief already knew where they had gone. Aye, said the old man, and there is more if you will hear it. Peggy. He brought the girl himself a little after by the back stair. Peggy Combe was a sharp-tongued, warm-hearted housemaid who had loved Delia for the only lady in that house who had ever thanked her by name, and she had carried a stone in her chest for 3 years. She twisted her apron and would not quite look up. I never told, miss, and I've been ashamed of it every day since. I were frightened. Lady Sabine, she's not a body you cross and keep your place. She swallowed. But I saw her. The night before the pearls was cried gone, late. I'd gone up for a shawl, and the passage were dark, and I saw her ladyship come out of your little sewing room with a candle, and she'd no business there, none, for you were long abed. I saw her at your workbox, miss. Her hands were in it. I thought naught of it then, but a lady's whim, and by morning you were the thief, and I were too small and too frighted to say I'd seen the true one. The tears came now. I'll say it tonight, miss, if you ask me. Before the magistrate, before the whole county. I'll not be a coward twice. Delia took the girl's rough hands in her own and held them, and did not weep, though something in her chest had gone tight and hot. You were never small, Peggy, she said, and you will not stand alone. There will be a ticket, and there will be a pearl, and now there will be you. Between the 3 we shall have the truth out, where no one can lock it in a cabinet again. So she had them, one by one, the pieces of it, the ticket that dated the sale before the crime, the maid who had seen the true hand at the workbox, and at her own throat, on its thin ribbon, the single genuine pearl that Nathaniel had given her openly, before the whole household, as a token no one could later call stolen, the one true pearl in all of Windermere, which, laid beside the cold white paste at Lady Sabine's neck, would speak louder than any confession forged in any patient hand. She did not yet know how she would bring them all into the one room and the one moment, but she knew that she must, and that the moment was the ball, and that the ball was tonight. She was thinking of exactly that, walking the long portrait gallery in the blue hour, when the light fails and the candles are not yet lit, when she came, without warning, upon the one thing she had not prepared herself to meet. He was standing beneath the portrait of his grandfather, still in his traveling coat, a grave and weathered man with the sea still in the set of his shoulders. Nathaniel Hart, Duke of Windermere, come home to a house, dressing itself for the betrothal he had agreed to out of duty and grief, and the settled belief that the only woman he had ever wanted was a thief who had robbed him and run. He turned at the sound of her step, expecting a servant. And then he saw her face in the failing light, and every year at sea went out of him at once. Delia. He said it not as a question, but as a man says a name he has said only to the dark for 3 years. His voice broke on the second sound of it. For a moment his whole grave face opened like a door, and there was nothing in it but the boy who had clasped a pearl at her throat and promised to come home. He took a step toward her before he knew he had. And then he remembered. She watched it happen, watched the door swing shut, watched the joy curdle into something far harder to bear, a grief with a wound of anger through the heart of it. Because he did not know what she knew. He knew only the story he had been given, that she had taken his family's pearls, that she had signed her guilt in her own hand, that she had fled his house sooner than face him, and that she had never, in 3 long years, sent him a single word. To him she was not the wronged woman standing wronged before him. She was the one betrayal he had never learned to sail past. And here she stood, in his house, on the eve of his betrothal to another, wearing that same small pearl at her throat, as though she had a right to it still. "You should not be here," he said at last, low and rough, and the courtesy in it cost him everything. "God knows why you have come, but you should not be here." She looked at him, and she did not grovel, and she did not raise her voice, and she did not weep, though the whole of her 3 years stood between them in the dark. She only lifted her chin a little and let him see that she was not ashamed. "No," she said softly. "I imagine I should not." And she did not tell him, not yet, not here, not before the ticket and the maid and the pearl could stand beside her, that the woman he mourned had never been a thief at all. The ballroom of Windmere Hall hadn't been so full of light in 3 years. Every candle in the great chandeliers had been lit, and the wax of 200 flames threw a warm gold across the county gentry who had come to see the new Duke betrothed. Silk rustled against the polished floor. Fans opened and shut like slow wings. In the far corner the musicians drew their bows across their strings in a soft, expectant hush, waiting for the moment when the dancing might begin. And through it all moved Lady Sabine Calvert, radiant in ivory and silver, her chin lifted, her smile fixed, moving among the guests as though she were already the mistress of every stone of the house. She had waited a long time for this night, and she meant to enjoy every hour of it. On a velvet cushion carried before her by a footman lay the Windmere pearls, the great heirloom rope with its antique silver clasp, shaped like a leaping heart. And every eye in the room drifted toward that cushion as she passed. They were the pride of the hearts. Those pearls, worn by duchesses for 100 years, and tonight they were to be clasped about the throat of the woman the Duke would marry. Sabine had arranged it so. She had whispered it into the dowager's ear for a fortnight until the old woman believed the idea her own. Let them see the pearls upon her. Let them understand, all of them, exactly who she had become. At the head of the room, beneath the tall portraits of his ancestors, stood Nathaniel Hart, Duke of Windmere. He wore his honor stiffly, like a man still more comfortable in a captain's coat on a heaving deck than in silk before a crowd. His face was grave, weathered by salt and sun and grief, and though the county pressed close to congratulate him, his eyes kept drifting past their shoulders, searching the room as if he expected at any moment to see a ghost. He had seen her that afternoon in the portrait gallery. He had seen the woman he had mourned for 3 long years, alive, standing quietly among the shadows, and the sight of her had not brought him peace. It had opened the old wound wide. She was the thief who'd confessed, he told himself. She was the woman who had robbed his house and fled. And yet when she had looked at him, there had been no guilt in her eyes at all, only a steadiness that troubled him more than any tears could have done. The Dowager Duchess Honoria sat enthroned in her high chair near the dais, cold and upright, her rings glittering on folded hands. She had cast Delia Ashby out of this house with a single word 3 years ago, and she did not intend to think of the girl tonight. Beside the hearth, comfortable and florid, stood Sir Marcus Pelham, the county magistrate, a glass of the Duke's claret warming in his fist, pleased with himself and pleased with the evening. And near the doorway, half in shadow, the town jeweler, Mr. Josiah Sowerby, dabbed at his damp forehead with a handkerchief and smiled at everyone, and met no one's eyes for long. Sir Marcus called for quiet, for it was his happy office to make the announcement, being the ranking gentleman present. The music died. The Dowager rose. The footman brought the cushion forward, and Lady Sabine turned her white throat to the room and lifted her chin so that the Duke might fasten the ancient clasp about her neck before them all. Nathaniel took the rope of pearls in his 2 brown hands. He looked at them a moment, at the cold white beads and the leaping silver heart, and something in his face tightened, some old grief he could not name. It was into that hush that Delia Ashby stepped forward. She came from the edge of the crowd where she had stood unnoticed in her plain gray traveling gown, and she did not hurry, and she did not raise her voice. She simply walked into the open floor before the dais until the candlelight fell full upon her, and the county gentry turned to stare at the stranger who had dared to break the moment. At her throat, upon a thin ribbon, lay a single small pearl. "Forgive me," she said, and her voice was quiet and clear and carried to every corner of the silent room. "Before that clasp is fastened, there is a thing this house has waited 3 years to learn." A murmur ran through the guests, like wind through wheat. The Dowager's face went white with fury. "How dare you?" she began. But Delia had already turned to the Duke, and she was looking at Nathaniel with those steady hazel eyes, and the sight of her stopped the old woman's tongue. "You gave me a pearl once, Your Grace," Delia said, and only he could hear how her voice trembled beneath its calm. "Openly before you sailed. A pearl from your own family strand, given as an honest man gives a token to the woman he means to wed. I have worn it at my throat every day of these 3 years. Through every mile of the road, you thought I fled down as a thief." Her fingers rose to the ribbon. "Here it is. It has never left me." She lifted the small pearl free and held it up between 2 fingers so that it caught the light. "This is a true Windermere pearl. It was drawn from that very rope before it left this house. If the strand you are about to clasp upon Lady Sabine is the strand it claims to be, then my pearl and those pearls are sisters, and any jeweler in the county may prove it in a moment. I ask only that they be compared. That is all. Let an honest test decide who has told the truth in this house, and who has lied." The word lied hung in the air. Every eye went to the pearls in the Duke's hands, and then to Lady Sabine, whose fixed smile had begun, very slightly, to crack at its edges. "This is monstrous," Sabine said too quickly. "This is a beggar woman's trick. A common thief crept back to disgrace us on the very night. Marcus, you know this creature. You signed the order against her yourself. She confessed. She stole from this family and ran. Have her put out into the rain where she belongs." But Sir Marcus Pelham, pompous and honest in equal measure, had drunk just enough claret to feel magisterial, and the challenge had been laid before him too plainly to wave away. "A test," he said, frowning, turning the notion over. "The young woman asks only for a test. That is not an unreasonable thing before God and the county. Sowerby, where is the man? You are a jeweler, sir. Come and settle it. Compare the beads and be done, and we shall all go on to our dancing." Josiah Sowerby did not want to come forward. It was written in every line of him, in the way his feet dragged, and his handkerchief worked at his neck. But 100 faces had turned to him, and there was no honest way to refuse. He crept to the center of the floor, and Nathaniel, saying nothing, laid the great rope of pearls across the jeweler's trembling palm, and Delia set her single small pearl beside it. Sowerby had his glass in his pocket, the little loop of his trade, and his hands shook so that he nearly dropped it. He fitted it to his eye. He bent over the strand, and the room watched a man's face fall to pieces, for he knew, of course. He had known from the moment she spoke, for he was the one who had bought the real pearls and sold this house their paste. He looked at the great rope, and he saw the dull, dead, too white sheen he had supplied himself, the leaded glass ground and polished in a back room, and he looked at the small true pearl beside it with its living warmth and its faint irregular grain, and there was no honest test on earth that would make the two agree. He tried. God knew he tried. He turned the strand this way and that. He cleared his throat. He opened his mouth to pronounce them a match, and found he could not force the lie past his lips with the loop still telling him the truth and the magistrate breathing over his shoulder. "Well, man," said Sir Marcus, "speak. Are they the same or are they not?" Sowerby's hand dropped. His voice, when it came, was a whisper the whole silent room could hear. "They are not the same. The strand is paste, Sir Marcus, glass, every bead of it. Only the girl's pearl is real." The ballroom broke open like a struck bell. 200 voices rose at once, gentry turning to gentry, fans snapping, a wave of astonishment rolling from wall to wall. The Dowager Duchess had half risen from her chair and now sat down again as though her legs had failed her, staring at the false pearls in the jeweler's hand as if they were a serpent, and Lady Sabine stood white and rigid in her ivory silk, the smile gone from her at last, her eyes darting to the doors. But Delia did not stop there, for she had not come to prove a single thing. She had come to prove all of it. "There is more," she said, and again the room hushed to hear her. "You cast me from this house on a confession, my lady." She turned to the Dowager now, and there was no bitterness in her voice, only a terrible steadiness. "A confession you were told I wrote. I never wrote a word of it. I never saw it until it was read against me. I ask that it be brought and read again tonight before Sir Marcus, who knows the hands of every family in this county. For I say to you that the hand that wrote my confession was not my hand at all." The Dowager, shaken to her marrow, could no more refuse than she could fly. The paper had been kept these 3 years in a strong box in her own parlor, evidence never destroyed, and a footman was sent, and it was brought, and Sir Marcus took it to the light of a branch of candles and studied the cramped, sloping script. Then Delia, who had spent 3 years as a companion and knew where such things were kept, drew from her sleeve a folded sheet of her own, a page of household accounts written in Lady Sabine's own hand, kept in the still-room ledgers, ordinary and undeniable. She laid it beside the confession. Sir Marcus looked from the one to the other. He was not a clever man, but he had signed 1,000 papers and witnessed 1,000 hands, and the truth of it needed no cleverness at all. The same backward lean, the same crossed T, the same curling loop upon the G. The confession that had branded Delia Ashby a thief, and the accounts kept by Lady Sabine Calvert had been set down by one and the same pen. "This is the same hand," Sir Marcus said slowly, and his florid face had gone grave. "God help us. This is the same hand." Lady Sabine took a step backward toward the doors, and found the way blocked by staring guests, and stopped. And it was then into that gathering storm that the great doors at the far end of the ballroom were flung wide, and Mr. Digby Rooke came striding through them, still in his riding coat, spattered to the knee with the mud of the road, a leather-bound book clutched against his chest. He had ridden hard through the wet dark to the town, and back at his friend the Duke's asking, and he had not ridden in vain. He crossed the floor and put the book into Sir Marcus's hands, breathless. "Sowerby's ledger," he said. "His own accounts, sir. Look at the date. For pity's sake, look at the date." Sir Marcus turned the pages, and the room held its breath, and Delia stood very still in the candlelight, with her one true pearl warm in her closed hand. The magistrate found the entry. He read it once to himself, and his brows drew down, and he read it aloud, so that no soul in that room could ever again pretend not to have heard. "Received of Lady Sabine Calvert," he read. "The Windermere pearl strand, entire and genuine against moneys advanced." He looked up, and his voice thickened. "And the date set against it, gentlemen, is a full week, before this house ever cried that the pearls were stolen, before Miss Ashby was ever accused, before a single pearl was ever found in her work-box." He lowered the ledger. "The pearls were not stolen at all. They were sold. Sold by the accuser herself, a week before she raised the cry of theft." The silence that followed was the deepest of all, for there was nothing left in it to doubt. Every piece had fallen into its place before their eyes, plain as daylight, and the county gentry who had spent 3 years believing a quiet gray girl a thief now understood, all at once and all together, exactly what had been done to her and exactly who had done it. The paste upon the cushion, the forgery in Sabine's own hand, the ledger that dated the sin a week ahead of the lie. She had been framed. She had never been a thief at all, and the woman who had condemned her, who stood even now in her ivory silk, with the false smile struck from her face, was the very hand that had sold the true pearls and coined the whole cruel tale to hide it. Nathaniel Hart turned from the ledger and turned from the paste pearls, and looked at last full at Delia Ashby, standing alone in the light with her one small true pearl held against her heart. And 3 years of grief and doubt and self-reproach broke apart in his weathered face, like ice going out on a river in the spring. For the space of 3 heartbeats, the great ballroom of Windermere Hall held so still that the guttering of the candles could be heard along the length of the gallery. The paste strand lay coiled upon the card table, where the jeweler's file had shamed it, dull as tallow beside the single true pearl that hung at Delia's throat, and every powdered head in the county had turned toward the corner where Mr. Josiah Sowerby stood, with his ledger open in another man's hands. He was a soft, careful man who had spent his life weighing small, bright things against small, dark weights, and he understood weight better than most. He weighed now the ruin of a jeweler who had sold a forgery to a duke against the ruin of a jeweler who had merely obeyed a lady, and he found the second the lighter burden by far. "I never sold them," he said, and his voice cracked upon the lie before it was well out of his mouth, so that he abandoned it and began again. "That is, the strand your grace sees upon the table, the paste. I supplied it. Yes, I own that I supplied it. But I did not steal a thing from this house. I bought the true pearls fair, for coin laid in my hand, and I was told the sale was the lady's own affair and none of mine to question." His eyes went helplessly, the way frightened eyes always go, to the person he most feared. They went to Lady Sabine. She had been standing very tall by the hearth in her betrothal silk, and to her credit, she did not flinch when the whole room followed the jeweler's gaze to her face. She had a gambler's blood, and a gambler's last instinct is to raise the stake past the point where others will follow. "The man is deranged," she said, clear and cold. "He has been caught selling counterfeit to gentlemen, and he means to spread his disgrace across better names than his own. Sir Marcus, I beg you, do not let a tradesman's terror become an accusation against your host's own blood." But Sir Marcus Pelham, magistrate of the county, was a pompous man and an honest one, and the two qualities had at last found a matter upon which they agreed. He had the ledger in his hands. He turned it toward the candles, and he read aloud, slowly, in the voice of a man who liked the sound of his own gravity, the entry that young Digby Rook had ridden through the wet dark to fetch: a rope of pearls, antique clasp, crest of a leaping heart, received of Lady S. Calvert against the discharge of debts, and beside it a date. The date was a full week before the morning the theft was ever cried through Windermere Hall, a full week before a single pearl had been laid in Delia's workbox, and a confession she never wrote had been produced against her. A week before, Sir Marcus repeated, that the dullest guest present might not miss it. "You sold the pearls, madam, a week before you discovered them stolen." He set the ledger down as though it had grown heavy. "One does not mislay a thing on Tuesday and sell it the Thursday prior. That is not misfortune, that is design." It was then that the last of Sowerby's courage failed him entirely, and with it, the last of Sabine's defense. "She came to my shop by the servant's way," he said, the words tumbling now, eager to be rid of themselves. "She said the young companion was in the family's way, that the Duke was fool enough to fancy her, that a parson's brat should not be let to marry into a coronet. She had me copy the clasp in paste. She kept one true pearl back from me, said she had a use for it, and I have wondered these 3 years what use, and now I see it hung at that lady's throat, and I am sick to my soul that I ever—" He got no further. He put his face in his hands and wept, which is an ugly thing in a grown man and a strangely convincing one. Every eye came back to Delia. She hadn't moved. Through the whole of it she had stood with her hands folded before her plain traveling gown, her chin level, her clear hazel eyes steady upon the wreck of the woman who had unmade her life, and she hadn't said one word. She did not say one now. She did not point, nor cry out, nor demand of the assembly whether they were satisfied at last. She did not remind the dowager of the cold word that had cast her into the rain 3 years gone, though the reminder would have been just. The heroine of that ballroom took her vindication as she had taken her ruin, without raising her voice, and in the taking of it so quietly, she shamed the room more thoroughly than any accusation could have done. For there is a kind of dignity that makes a crowd examine itself, and she wore it as plainly as she wore her single pearl. Lady Sabine looked at that pearl, and something in her face came at last, unfastened. "You kept it," she said, "and it was not to the room, but to Delia, low and disbelieving. All this while, a beggar in a borrowed gown. And you kept the one thing that could—" She stopped. She had been the cleverest person in every room she had entered for the length of her scheming life, and she understood before any of the fine gentry crowded round her did, that she had been beaten not by cleverness, but by the one thing she had never thought to reckon with, that a wronged girl might simply refuse to be made bitter, and might keep, through 3 winters of genuine want, a token she could have sold in any of them for bread, because it had been given to her openly by a man who loved her, and because she had never once believed the world's word over her own heart. Sir Marcus lifted his hand, and 2 of his men came forward from the door where they had been keeping the night. "Lady Sabine Calvert," he said, and the formality of it fell across the music room like a shadow. "Upon the evidence of this ledger, of this false strand, of the confession writ in your own hand, and of the jeweller's own word, freely given, I must take you into my keeping to answer at the assizes for theft, for forgery, and for the false accusing of an innocent woman." She did not struggle. She drew her paste-white shoulders back and let them lead her out through the parting crowd. And if she wept, no one saw it. And the great doors of Windermere closed upon her going. Into the hush that followed came a sound no one had looked for. The Dowager Duchess Honoria Hart, who had ruled that house 40 years and never once bent her proud neck to any soul beneath a coronet, came down from the dais where she sat, and crossed the floor to where Delia stood, and there, before the whole assembled county, the old woman went down upon her knees. "I cast you out," she said, and her voice, that had been iron the day she did it, was cracked china now. "On a lie, and a scrap of forged paper, and my own certainty that I could read a heart at a glance. I told myself a parson's orphan had shown her breeding. I told myself I had been merciful not to see you hanged. Child, I do not ask you to forgive it. I ask only that you hear me say I know what I did." And Delia, who might have let her kneel, and whom no one in that room would have blamed for letting her kneel, stooped at once and took the old woman's hands and raised her up. "Then it is done, and we will not speak of it again," she said gently. And that was all. She did not make a sermon of it. She had learned in 3 hard years that the people who are quickest to believe the worst of you are seldom worth the breath of a speech, and the ones worth keeping need none. Through all of this, a man had been standing very near the door, and now he came forward, and the crowd, sensing what it had come to see, drew back to make him room. Nathaniel Hart, Duke of Windermere, who had crossed half the world's oceans and come home to mourn a woman he believed had robbed him and fled, who had looked into the face in the portrait gallery only the night before and seen the ghost of everything he had lost, stood before her now with the whole ruin of the lie swept clear between them. And for a moment the grave, weathered captain could not find a word to say. I was told you confessed, he said at last, low, only for her though the room strained to hear it. I was told you took the pearls I would have given you the whole of, and that you would not even stay to face me, and I was at sea and could not. His jaw worked. 3 years I have been angry at a woman who did not exist. And a letter I sent you, the one letter, the one that would have told you I did not believe a word of it. I never had it, Delia said quietly. No. His mouth twisted. She had it, as she had everything else. He drew a breath. So each of us was made to think the other had turned away. I mourned you as a thief, and you thought I had abandoned you to it. I thought, said Delia, and here for the first time her steady voice came near to trembling, and she mastered it, that the man who gave me this pearl before all the house, openly, as no man does who is ashamed, could not truly have believed I would steal from him. I could not make the belief and the man fit together, so I kept the pearl, and I waited to be able to prove which of them was true. It undid him. Whatever a duke's dignity is made of, hers had just dismantled his entirely. Cordelia, he said, her whole name, the name no one had used since the day she was cast out. I did not come tonight to be betrothed. I came because Fairclough sent word that I should be in this room at this hour, and I trusted the old man, though I did not know why. Now I know why. He took her hand, there before the magistrate and the gentry, and his kneeling grandmother and the weeping jeweler and every soul who had once been so ready to name her thief. I will not ask you as a man discharging a debt. I have no debt that could be paid this way. I ask you because I have loved you since before I sailed, and mourned you every day of 3 years. And I find, standing here, that the mourning was only love that had been told a lie. Will you have me? Not the coronet, me. And Delia, who never groveled and never raised her voice, and never once in 3 years let the world make her small, smiled at him then, with her clear eyes bright, and said that she would. Near the wall an aging butler stood very straight, and let a tear run frankly down into his neckcloth, without shame, for Mr. Fairclough had believed her when believing her cost him his ease, and might have cost him his place, and it was his hidden pawn ticket that had begun the unraveling. Beside him the housemaid Peggy Combe, who had seen Lady Sabine at the work-box that long ago night and never been let to tell it, laughed out loud and then clapped both hands over her mouth. But Delia had heard and turned, and found her 2 truest friends in that whole grand house among the servants, and would not let them be forgot. They were vindicated that night as surely as she was, the ones who had kept faith when faith was folly. The Duke sent then for the true pearls, which Sowerby confessed were locked in his own strong box in the town. And young Rook rode a second time through the clearing weather to fetch them, and it was near dawn before the rope came home to Windermere Hall. But it was not the rope that mattered. Nathaniel drew from Delia's throat the thin ribbon that had held her single pearl through all her poverty, and he threaded that one true pearl back into the place at the strand's heart where it had always belonged, so that the rope was whole again, and every pearl upon it genuine. Then he lifted the antique clasp with its leaping heart, the very crest that had once been the mark of her condemnation, the proof they said damned her, and with his own hands he closed it at the back of her neck. The clasp that had branded her a thief now fastened her honor where all could see it. She wore the Windermere pearls, not as a woman restored to what she had lost, but as one who had been proven at last exactly what she had always been. They were married from Windermere Hall before the summer was out, and the county that had once whispered thief now curtsied to a duchess, which tells you something worth remembering about counties, and perhaps about all of us. For the world is very quick to call a girl a thief when she is poor and friendless and cannot answer back, and very slow to ask who, in the fine silk by the fire, had the most to gain from her disgrace. The truest heart in the house wore the plainest gown. It nearly always does. So tell me, before you go, who in your own life turned out to be exactly who they said they were, only after everyone had stopped believing them. Leave it in the comments below. I read everyone, and if the honest name won tonight, and you would like another story where the quiet ones are proven right at the last, then subscribe and stay with me a while. There are more whispers of love to come, and I would dearly love to share the next of them with you.